She was 8 months pregnant standing in the kitchen when she heard the key turn in the front door. She already knew something was wrong, and the woman who walked in with her husband had no idea at all, who she had just walked into. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it takes to stand completely still when your entire world is breaking. No screaming, no tears, no shaking voice, just stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from weakness. The kind that only comes from a woman who has spent 27 years training her body, her mind, and her reaction time to do exactly the opposite of what every human instinct is screaming at her to do. Most people crack under that kind of pressure. Claire Merritt had built a career out of not cracking. And on this particular Tuesday night in October, in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, that training was about to matter more than any competition she had ever entered. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this story. Because this story is about something that happens in living rooms and kitchens across this country every single day. Betrayal. The quiet, patient, devastating kind. The kind where one person in a marriage is building a life and the other is dismantling it one lie at a time. And this story is also about something else. Something rarer. What happens when the person being betrayed refuses to be destroyed by it? What happens when she has already decided, long before the front door opened, exactly how this night was going to go? Stay with me, because by the time this story is over, you are going to question everything you think you know about strength, about patience, about what a person is truly capable of when they have been pushed past the point of no return. This is not a simple story. It does not have a simple ending, but it is one of the most remarkable stories I have ever had the privilege of telling. Before we go any further, let me lay out the 3 things you're going to want answered by the end of this video. Number 1, who is Claire Merritt, and what exactly did she spend 27 years training to do? Number 2, what kind of man brings another woman into his pregnant wife's home? And what did he think was going to happen? And number 3, the big one, the one that took me weeks of research and multiple conversations to fully understand. What happened inside that house after that front door closed? Because here is what I can tell you right now. No police were called that night, no ambulance, no neighbors heard a sound. The next morning, Claire was gone, packed and gone, and the woman who had walked in with Daniel Merritt never set foot in that house again. 2 weeks later, a sealed envelope arrived at a family attorney's office. And what was inside that envelope changed everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand that October night, you need to understand the 2 people at the center of it. And the story of how they ended up in that kitchen together is one that starts not in Ohio, not in a suburb, but on the floor of a small gymnasium in rural Indiana, with a 9-year-old girl and her father, and a sport that would define the next 3 decades of her life. Claire Ann Walsh was born in the spring of 1987 in Terre Haute, Indiana, the second of 3 children to a retired Army Staff Sergeant named Robert Walsh and a registered nurse named Donna. The Walsh household was not a loud household. Robert Walsh was a man of few words and enormous expectations. He didn't yell. He didn't lecture, he demonstrated. And what he demonstrated to his children, through years of early mornings and quiet discipline and a refusal to accept excuses, was that the most powerful thing a person can possess is not talent, not luck, not physical size. It is control. Control over your emotions. Control over your reactions. On control over the story you tell yourself when things get hard. Claire discovered judo at 9 years old through her father, who had trained briefly during his military years and believed with every fiber of his being that every child, but especially every daughter, should know how to handle themselves. He drove Claire to a youth judo club in Terre Haute twice a week for the first year. By the end of that year, the sensei called Robert Walsh privately and told him something that Robert would repeat to Claire on her wedding day, 20 years later. He said, "Your daughter doesn't just learn judo. She understands it. There is a difference. Most students learn the mechanics. Claire understands the principle, and the principle of judo, the reason Daigoro Kano created it in Japan in 1882, is not about overpowering your opponent. It is about using their force against them. It is about patience, timing, and the disciplined application of minimal effort to achieve maximum effect. It is, in ways that matter more than most people realize, a philosophy. And Claire Walsh absorbed that philosophy the way some children absorb language, naturally, instinctively, before she had the words to describe what she was doing. By 15, Claire had won 2 regional championships. By 17, she was competing at the state level and winning. By 19, she was on the radar of coaches at the national level, a compact, technically immaculate competitor whose record was defined not by flashy throws or aggressive offense, but by something coaches talk about in hushed, almost reverent terms. She had the patience of someone 3 times her age. She would wait. She would absorb pressure. She would let her opponent overcommit. And then, in a moment so fast it barely registered on camera, she would redirect that energy and the match would be over. She won without appearing to fight. And that, to anyone who has studied judo seriously, is the highest possible expression of the art. A knee injury at 22 ended her competitive career earlier than anyone expected, including Claire herself. She had been pointing toward the Olympic trials. The injury was the kind that could be managed, could be trained around, but not at the level required to compete for a spot on the national team. She spent 6 months in a kind of grief that she has since described as the hardest thing she endured before the events of that October night. Because judo had not been a hobby. It had been the organizing principle of her life. Every decision, every morning, every meal, for 13 years, had been arranged around the mat. And then the mat was gone. What Claire did next says everything about who she was. She didn't quit. She redirected. Within a year, she had obtained her teaching certification and was student teaching 6th grade English in Columbus. Within 2 years, she was teaching full-time and running a weekend women's self-defense class out of a community center in her neighborhood. She still trained. She still kept her technique sharp. But the competition was over, and she had, in the way her father had always taught her, accepted that reality without bitterness and built something new from it. She met Daniel Merritt at a mutual friend's birthday party in the spring of 2016. She was 28, and he was 38. He was charming. The kind of charm that fills a room before a person enters it. The kind that makes you feel, in the first 5 minutes of conversation, like you are the most interesting person in the space. He asked about her job. He laughed at her jokes before the punchlines. He called her 3 days later, which in those years felt like a notable act of decisiveness. Claire had dated carefully and not extensively. She had standards that were harder to articulate than to recognize. She knew when something felt wrong before she could explain why, and with Daniel, in those early months, nothing felt wrong. He was attentive. He was curious. He was, by every visible measure, a man who respected her. They were engaged 18 months later. They were married in the summer of 2018, in a small outdoor ceremony in Terre Haute. Robert Walsh walked his daughter down the aisle. In the photographs from that day, you can see something in Claire's face that is not easy to describe. It is not simply happiness. It is the particular satisfaction of a person who has worked very hard for something and believes in that moment that the work was worth it. What Claire did not know on her wedding day, what she would not learn until much later, was that the man she was marrying had a pattern. Not a history anyone would have immediately told her about, because people rarely do. But a pattern. A way of being in relationships that looked, from the outside, like commitment, but was built on a foundation of performance rather than principle. Daniel Merritt was not a bad person in the way that word is usually used. He was something more common and in some ways more difficult to navigate. A man who had never truly examined what he was capable of, who had constructed an image of himself as a good partner that he had never been forced to test under real pressure. And when real pressure came, in the form of a pregnancy that was wanted but overwhelming, a marriage that required more than attention at parties, a wife who was deeply, quietly perceptive, Daniel Merritt did not rise to it. He retreated. He retreated in a direction that was familiar to him, a direction that required nothing of him, a direction that would eventually bring him through his own front door on a Tuesday night in October with a woman who was not his wife. The affair began 14 months before that October night. Claire was 11 weeks pregnant when Daniel Merritt started seeing a woman named Jessica Calloway, 27 years old, who worked in the administrative department of the regional logistics company where Daniel served as a director of operations. This is not unusual information. The workplace is, statistically, the single most common origin point for extramarital affairs. Researchers estimate that between 40 and 65% of affairs begin among colleagues. What made this particular situation different was not where it started. It was what Claire did when she found out. She found out in December of that year. Not from a friend, not from an anonymous tip. She found out the way millions of women before her have found out, but the way that no one talks about in polite company but everyone recognizes. She noticed something small. A text message deleted just slightly too fast. A weekend business trip to Louisville that produced no receipts on the credit card they shared. A shift in the frequency and texture of conversation. The way Daniel, who had never been a particularly demonstrative husband, became actively distant in a way that felt deliberate rather than incidental. Claire Walsh had spent her entire adult life reading bodies. Reading the way a person holds their weight. Reading the angle of a shoulder and what it signals about intent. She had applied those skills to men twice her size in competition and emerged victorious. Applying them to a man she lived with was not difficult. It was devastating, but it was not difficult. She did not confront him. And this is the part of this story that people find hardest to understand. The part that, when I have told it to others in the course of researching this video, produces the most confusion and the most discomfort. Why didn't she say something? Why didn't she demand answers, throw him out, call the whole thing off? The answer is both simple and profound, and it says everything about the kind of person Claire Merritt is. She needed proof, not for herself. She already knew. She needed proof for what came next. She had spoken to an attorney. She understood that in Ohio, in 2023, the legal and financial outcomes of a divorce are shaped enormously by what you can document. She had a child coming. She was not going to leave that marriage, was not going to leave her child's financial security on the word of her own instincts alone, and however accurate those instincts were. So she waited. She gathered. She documented. For 14 months, Claire Merritt maintained the outward performance of a normal marriage while assembling, in methodical silence, an archive. Hotel receipts she found in jacket pockets and photographed. A second email account she discovered when she used Daniel's laptop to print a school assignment, and his browser auto-completed an address she had never seen. Text messages, not read without his knowledge, but visible in the preview notifications that appeared on his unlocked phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. She screenshotted them on her own phone, dated them, and saved them in a folder she password protected. She was not paranoid. She was not obsessive. She was precise. She was doing what her father had taught her to do on the mat and off it. Gather information, control your reactions, and wait for the moment when your opponent's own movement creates the opening you need. During those 14 months, Claire also gave birth to a baby girl. The delivery was on a Wednesday morning in early summer. Daniel was in the room. He held his daughter for the first time and, by all accounts, by Claire's own account, appeared genuinely moved. Whether that was real or performed or some complicated mixture of both is not something anyone can answer definitively. What Claire has said is this. She watched his face in that moment and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not forgiveness, not warmth toward him, something colder and more final. She saw in the way he looked at their daughter, in the man he could have been. And she understood, with the clarity of someone who has just spent 48 hours in labor, that she would not spend the rest of her life waiting for that man to appear. She had given herself a deadline. She had not told anyone, not her mother, not her closest friend, not the attorney she had been consulting for 6 months. But she had made herself a private promise. She would give Daniel Merritt until their daughter's first birthday to choose. To stop. To come to her himself and tell her the truth and ask her for the chance to repair it. She was not naive enough to believe he would, but she was principled enough to give him the opportunity. The first birthday came. He did not come to her. The deadline passed, and 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday night in October, he drove home with Jessica Calloway in his car. We do not know whether Daniel chose that night specifically or whether it was simply the culmination of an arrogance that had been building unchecked for over a year. His attorney would later offer no explanation, Jessica Calloway, in the single statement she made through her own representation, said that Daniel had told her the house would be empty, that Claire was staying at her mother's for a few days. Whether he believed that, whether he had miscalculated, whether he had simply stopped caring about the consequences, we cannot say with certainty. What we can say is this: he was wrong. Claire was home. She had been home all day. She had, in fact, spoken to Daniel on the phone at 3 in the afternoon. A brief, an unremarkable conversation about dinner. And he had given no indication of what was coming, which meant one of two things. Either he had decided in those final hours to walk this through the front door of his own life, or he had stopped thinking about Claire entirely. Both possibilities are, in their own way, remarkable. The time on Claire's phone, she checked it almost involuntarily as she heard the car in the driveway, was 10:47 p.m. She was in the kitchen. Their daughter was asleep in the nursery. The baby monitor sat on the counter beside Claire's mug of chamomile tea, and the monitor's small green light was steady, which meant the room was quiet, which meant the baby was sleeping. Claire has said, in the account she later gave to her attorney and then to her mother, yes, that she heard the second car door before the first one had fully shut. She heard 2 sets of footsteps on the front path. She did not move from the kitchen. She set down her mug and she waited. The front door opened at 10:49. Daniel entered first. He was mid-sentence, talking to someone behind him in the easy, unguarded tone of a person who believes themselves unobserved. The laugh he gave as he stepped into the entry hall was the laugh of a man without a single care. Jessica Calloway stepped in behind him. She was still smiling at whatever he had said when she looked up and saw Claire standing in the kitchen doorway. The smile ended. Claire has said that she watched Jessica's face carefully in that first second. Not out of cruelty, but because the face told her something important. Jessica Calloway did not know that Claire was home. And she had not known. Whatever Daniel had told her, he had told her wrong. And Claire filed that information away. Daniel saw Claire approximately 2 seconds after Jessica did. His reaction was different. His face did not go blank with surprise the way Jessica's had. It went through a sequence that Claire described to her mother later with the kind of clinical precision that still, months afterward, made Donna Walsh catch her breath. First, recognition. Then calculation. A visible moment of recalibration, of assessing the situation and searching for an exit. And then, arriving faster than it should have, something that looked almost like defiance. As if he had decided, in that 2-second window, to brazen it through. As if he had concluded that Claire's composure, her complete stillness, her absence of visible distress, was somehow an invitation to manage the situation on his terms. It was the single greatest miscalculation of his life. Claire spoke first. She did not raise her voice. She addressed Jessica directly, not Daniel, and she asked one question. "Did he tell you I was pregnant?" Jessica Calloway, to her credit, answered honestly. She said no. She said she hadn't known. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. The specific weight of that exchange, the understanding that settled between 2 women about the man standing between them, changed the geometry of the confrontation in a way that Daniel had not anticipated and could not recover from. Claire nodded. She said, "I believe you." And then she looked at Daniel and she said nothing. What followed over the next several minutes has been described by Jessica Calloway as one of the most extraordinary things she has ever witnessed. Claire did not shout. She did not throw anything. She did not reach for her phone. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms loose at her sides, and she waited while Daniel, increasingly unnerved by her silence, began to talk. He said things. The kinds of things people say when they are cornered and afraid and hoping words will build a wall between themselves and the consequences of their actions. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said Claire needed to calm down. He said she was being emotional. And then, and this is the moment that everything turned on, he stepped forward and he put his hand on her arm. He gripped it hard, and he said, "I need you to calm down and act like an adult." What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Claire Merritt moved. In the account she gave her attorney, she described it this way. She used a single judo control technique, a modified osotogari, a major outer reaping throw, executed with reduced force precisely calibrated to subdue without serious injury. Daniel Merritt went down, not gently, but without serious harm. He hit the kitchen floor, hard, and he stayed there, not because he was incapacitated, but because the combination of physics and shock had temporarily removed his capacity for independent action. Jessica Calloway, who was standing in the entry hall approximately 8 feet away, did not move. She has since said that in that moment she could not have moved if her life had depended on it. She stood absolutely still and watched Claire Merritt crouch down beside her husband, and she could not hear what Claire said to him, but she watched Daniel Merritt's face as she said it, and she has never forgotten what that face looked like. He looked, she said, like a man who had just understood something for the first time. Not afraid, not angry. Something she struggled to name but eventually settled on. Accountable. As if the words Claire was saying to him on that kitchen floor were words he had somehow always known were coming and had spent years constructing an entire life to avoid hearing. He was on that floor for perhaps 40 seconds. When Claire stood and stepped back, he got up. Slowly. And he did not come toward her again. Claire turned to Jessica. She said 2 things. The first was, "This was not your fault. He is a liar, and you deserve to know the truth before any of this happened." The second was, "I need you to leave. I'm asking you politely. I suggest you do it now." Jessica Calloway left. She drove herself home. She sat in her car in her apartment parking lot for over an hour before she went inside. She did not call Daniel that night. She did not call him the following morning. She has not spoken to him voluntarily since. Claire went upstairs to the nursery. She checked on her daughter, who was still sleeping, green light steady on the monitor. She stood over the crib for a few minutes. Then she went to the bedroom she had shared with Daniel Merritt for 5 years, and she pulled a bag from the top shelf of the closet, a bag she had already packed, and sometime in the 2 weeks between his missed deadline and this night, and she carried it downstairs. She took the diaper bag from the hook by the door. She took the car seat from the garage. And at 11:32 p.m., she strapped her daughter into the back seat of her car and she drove west on Route 70 toward Terre Haute, toward her mother's house, and she did not look back. Donna Walsh was awake when Claire arrived. She had been awake since 11, when Claire had called her from the kitchen. A brief, quiet call, barely 2 minutes. She had not said much. She had said, "I'm leaving tonight. I'll be there around 2. Donna had not asked questions. She had put on the porch light, made a pot of tea, and waited. When Claire came through the door carrying her sleeping daughter, Donna took the baby and Claire sat down at the kitchen table, saying, and for the first time in over a year, perhaps for the first time since that December morning when she had first understood what Daniel was doing, she allowed herself to be still in a way that wasn't performance. She sat at her mother's kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and she was simply a woman who was very, very tired. She slept for 8 hours. Her daughter slept beside her in the portable crib Donna had kept from when Claire's youngest sibling was small. In the morning, Claire ate breakfast, called her attorney, and began the formal process of ending her marriage. The attorney already had the 22-page document, the archive Claire had been building for over a year. Hotel receipts, credit card statements cross-referenced with travel records, time-stamped photographs of text message previews, a printout of the secondary email account, and a representative sample of its contents. The attorney, who has handled hundreds of divorce cases in a career spanning 3 decades, later told a colleague that it was the most comprehensively documented case she had encountered from a non-investigative source. She said, "Most of my clients come to me with a feeling. Claire Merritt came to me with evidence." Meanwhile, back in Columbus, Daniel Merritt spent the night in his own house, alone, in a silence that has no adequate description. He called Claire's phone twice, at midnight and at 6 in the morning. She did not answer. He did not leave voicemails. At 9 a.m., he called his own attorney. Not, as might be assumed, to discuss the divorce he must have known was coming. And he called to discuss whether what Claire had done the previous night constituted assault. His attorney asked a series of careful questions. Who had initiated physical contact? What force had been applied? What injuries had been sustained? The answers to those questions were not favorable to Daniel's position. He had grabbed Claire's arm first. The force she had applied in response had been measured. No broken bones, no lacerations, no lasting injury of any kind beyond the spectacular bruise to his dignity. His attorney advised him, in words that have apparently become something of a legend in that firm's hallway lore, that pursuing the matter would be not merely inadvisable but profoundly inadvisable. He did not pursue it. What happened publicly in the weeks that followed is worth examining, because it illuminates something important about how we consume stories like this one, and how rarely the public version resembles the private truth. A truncated and inaccurate version of the events of that Tuesday night made its way, as stories do, through social media. It began in a neighborhood group on Facebook, traveled to Reddit, was picked up briefly by a true crime podcast that handled it without verification. In the public version, the details shifted with each retelling in the ways that details always shift. Claire's pregnancy was exaggerated, the confrontation was dramatized, Daniel's injuries were inflated, and the word assault began to appear in comment sections and thread titles as a framing device. There were people, and there are always people, who heard the broad strokes and concluded that what Claire had done was excessive, that a pregnant woman defending herself from a man who had grabbed her arm had somehow crossed a line. I want to be careful here. I want to be precise, because the details matter, and the details are these. Daniel Merritt grabbed his pregnant wife first. He initiated contact. What followed was a proportionate response executed with the specific intention of avoiding serious harm by a woman who had the technical capacity to cause it. The law in Ohio is unambiguous on this point, which is why no charges were filed, no case was opened, and no authority of any kind concluded that Claire Merritt had done anything other than defend herself. The divorce proceedings were swift. On 6 weeks from the filing to the signature. This is not typical. Contested divorces in Ohio average anywhere from 6 months to several years. Daniel Merritt's attorneys apparently took one look at the 22-page document, consulted with their client, and advised cooperation. The settlement included the family home, which Claire subsequently sold and used to purchase a smaller house in a neighborhood closer to her school. Primary custody of their daughter was awarded to Claire, with scheduled visitation for Daniel, which he has exercised, to his credit, consistently and without incident. The financial arrangement was, according to a family law observer who reviewed the public filing, notably favorable to the petitioner. Daniel signed. And then he was quiet. Jessica Calloway left the company where she and Daniel had worked within a month of the incident. She relocated to Portland, Oregon. She gave a single public statement, brief and carefully worded, through a representative. She had been misled about the circumstances of Daniel's marriage. She had made choices based on false information, and she lived with that. Sometime later, through a mutual acquaintance, she sent a message asking whether Claire would be willing to speak with her. Claire did not respond. This is not presented here as judgment of either woman. It is presented as the shape of how these things resolve. Imperfectly, incompletely, with threads that remain untied because life does not offer the clean conclusions we construct in retrospect. Now here is something that did not make it into any of the social media versions of this story. Something that Claire told her mother and her attorney, something that a few people close to her know, and something that I think is the most important piece of this entire account. On that kitchen floor, in the 40 seconds between the throw and Daniel getting back to his feet, Claire Merritt made a decision. Not the decision she had already made about leaving. That had been made weeks before. The packed bag on the closet shelf was proof of that. A different decision. A smaller one in terms of physical movement. An enormous one in terms of everything else. She has described it like this. When Daniel grabbed her arm, her body moved the way it had been trained to move for 27 years. That part was not a decision. It was reflex, biology. 27 years of muscle memory arriving exactly when it had been prepared for. But what came after the throw was a decision. Because in the moment after Daniel hit the floor, and before she crouched down beside him, Claire Merritt was aware, with the absolute precision of a trained martial artist in the full state of alert, of what she was capable of doing next. She had the position, the training, and the physical advantage to escalate far beyond what she had done. She has not elaborated publicly on the specifics. She doesn't need to. Anyone who understands Judo, or Jiu-Jitsu, or Krav Maga all disciplines she had trained in at various points in her life, understands the range of options available to a practitioner in that position. She chose none of them. And here is the reason she gave her mother. I'm at 2 in the morning at Donna Walsh's kitchen table, in the quiet aftermath of the most extraordinary night of her life. She said, I felt the baby move. Right in that moment, the instant Daniel hit the floor, her daughter moved inside her. A kick. The ordinary miracle of a child announcing herself to the world. And in that fraction of a second, Claire Merritt stepped back from every instinct that 27 years of training had refined and sharpened. And she chose something different. She chose her daughter. She chose the future over the justification. She chose to use the word her father had used for 3 decades on the mat and off it: control. Not the control of dominance, the control of restraint, the hardest kind. The kind that requires more strength than any technique. Her sensei, the woman who had coached Claire for 8 years before her competitive career ended, a woman now in her late 60s who still runs her dojo outside of Columbus, learned about the incident through the grapevine, the way coaches always learn about the lives of their former students. She was asked, in the course of the research for this video, to characterize what Claire had done. Not the throw, the restraint. She thought for a long moment before she answered. Then she said, the throw is easy to explain. We train for that. What is very hard to train for, what most students never fully achieve, is the ability to stop, to have the capacity and not use it, to understand, in real time, in the middle of an adrenalized crisis, that enough is enough and not 1 ounce more. That, she said, is the highest expression of what we do. And if Claire achieved that on that night, then everything I ever taught her reached the person it was meant to reach. In the months that followed, Claire's extraordinary discipline in both the documentation of the affair and the management of the confrontation itself produced outcomes that would not have been possible without it. The financial settlement, the custody arrangement, the clean, uncontested legal record. None of these things would have been achievable if Claire had acted on the initial impulse that any human being in her position would have felt. Rage, hurt, the need to make the pain visible. Instead, she had converted those impulses over 14 months into paperwork, into photographs, into a sealed envelope delivered to an attorney's office. And the most powerful thing Claire Merritt brought into that kitchen on that October night was not her training. It was her patience. The training was the insurance policy. The patience was the plan. There is a concept in Judo, in most martial arts actually, that serious practitioners describe with a Japanese term, zanshin. It translates roughly as remaining mind. It refers to the state of relaxed awareness a practitioner maintains after a technique is executed. Not relaxing completely, not dropping your guard, but not escalating either. Holding the moment. Being present in the aftermath without acting from the aftermath. Claire Merritt's entire conduct over 14 months of a crumbling marriage, and in the 40 seconds on that kitchen floor, is the most complete expression of zanshin I have encountered outside of a dojo, or she held the moment. She was present in the aftermath. And she did not act from the place of injury when acting from that place would have cost her everything. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, a letter arrived at Claire Merritt's new address. The smaller house, the one closer to her school, the one with her daughter's drawings magneted to the refrigerator and her own competition medals in a box in the closet that she had not yet decided what to do with. The letter was handwritten. It was 4 pages long. It was not addressed to Claire. It was addressed to her daughter. Daniel Merritt had written to a child who was, at the time of writing, approximately 8 months old. He had written it as if she might read it at 16 or 17, as if she were already the person she was going to become. I'm the person who would someday want to know who her father had been and what had happened to her parents' marriage and what, if anything, her father had understood about it. He wrote without a lawyer's involvement. The letter contained no legal language, no self-justification that had a strategic purpose. It was, by every account of people who have been told about its contents, Claire told her mother, who told me in the careful and measured terms of a woman still protecting her daughter's privacy, the most honest thing Daniel Merritt had ever committed to paper. He acknowledged what he had done. He did not minimize it. He expressed a specific and apparently genuine comprehension of what his choices had cost Claire, not in legal or financial terms, but in the particular way that betrayal costs the person who is betrayed. The rewriting of memory, the loss of certainty about a shared past, the grief of mourning a marriage you thought you were still in while your partner had already left it. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask Claire to reconsider anything. He wrote to his daughter about what kind of man he intended to become, starting from the morning after that October night. Whether those intentions have held, we cannot verify. What we know is that he has exercised his visitation rights without incident, has contributed financially as required and on time, and has not attempted, through social media, through mutual acquaintances, or through any channel, to shape the narrative of what happened in ways that would damage Claire's reputation or her position in the custody arrangement. These are not extraordinary things. They are the minimum. But they are, at least, the minimum. Claire read the letter alone on her back porch on a Sunday afternoon, while her daughter napped inside. She read it twice. She sat for a long time afterward with the letter on her lap and the late autumn light coming through the trees in the yard her daughter would grow up playing in. Then she went inside, opened the drawer of her bedside table, and removed a fireproof metal box, the kind you can buy at any hardware store for about $30, the kind people use for passports and social security cards and the documents that matter. Inside the box were her daughter's hospital bracelet, signed a photograph of Claire at 17, mid-throw, winning her first state championship, the expression on her face focused and fierce and absolutely certain. And her father's Army dog tags, which Robert Walsh had given her on the morning of her first major competition and told her to keep, regardless of how the day went. She put Daniel's letter in the box. She closed the lid. She locked it. She has told no one whether she intends to give it to her daughter. She has not decided. The decision, like so many of the most important decisions in a life, is being held in suspension, preserved rather than resolved, waiting for the moment when the right answer becomes clear. Her mother has an opinion about what Claire should do. Claire's attorney has an opinion. I suspect you have an opinion. But this is Claire's choice, and it belongs to no one else. And the fact that it remains unmade, that she is living in the question rather than reaching for the answer, is, I think, the most human and the most honest thing about this entire story. There is a final detail that I want to give you, because I believe it matters. Approximately 6 months after the divorce was finalized, a woman knocked on the door of Claire's self-defense class on a Saturday morning. She was in her early 30s. She had a bruise on her forearm that she had not fully managed to cover. She said she had heard about the class from a neighbor. She did not know the name of the woman who taught it. She stood in the doorway of the community center with that bruised arm and said she wasn't sure if this was the right place and she wasn't sure she was ready. Claire looked at her for a moment, Ian, and then she said, "You're in the right place. Come in, sit down. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be here." The woman came in. She has been coming back every Saturday since. Claire Merritt is 37 years old. She teaches 6th grade English in Columbus, Ohio, Monday through Friday. She runs her women's self-defense class on Saturday mornings and added a second session last spring. Free of charge, open enrollment, no experience required. She does not advertise the second session as anything other than what it is. But word has moved through the community in the way that useful, honest things do. Quietly, person by person, through the networks that exist between women who have had to become their own protection. The class is usually full. Her daughter, who turned 2 this past summer, has her mother's eyes. In a photograph Donna Walsh shared in the course of this research, a photograph from a birthday party, the yard full of afternoon light and colorful streamers, you can see Claire watching her daughter take a first uncertain step toward the center of the yard. Claire's expression is not anxious. It is the expression of a person who understands exactly how this works. You let them move toward the open space, and you stay close enough to catch them if they fall. And you trust, not blindly but knowingly, based on everything you can see, that they are going to make it on their own. Daniel Merritt has moved to another state. He sees his daughter on the schedule agreed to in the settlement. He has not spoken publicly about any aspect of his marriage or its end. Mutual acquaintances describe him as quieter than he used to be, or whether that represents genuine change or simply the contraction that follows a very public personal humiliation is not something anyone can determine from the outside. People are not before and after photographs. Change is not binary. What we can say is that the woman he underestimated for 5 years has demonstrated, in the months since that October night, the same qualities she demonstrated on that kitchen floor: precision, composure, and the absolute refusal to allow someone else's choices to determine the shape of her life. Jessica Calloway is in Portland. She has built, from what can be determined, a new chapter for herself at a remove from the events that intersected her life with Claire's. She has not sought further contact. On whether her conscience rests easy is between her and whatever accounting she keeps for herself in the quiet hours. I think of her as a secondary casualty of Daniel Merritt's self-deception, a woman who made choices she might have made differently with accurate information. The moral weight of those choices belongs primarily to him. What she does with her share of it is her business, and Donna Walsh, retired nurse, mother, the woman who kept the porch light on and the tea hot, sits in her kitchen in Terre Haute on Sunday afternoons and FaceTimes her granddaughter, who responds to the phone screen with the delighted incoherence of a 2-year-old, and who is, by every account, thriving. Donna has a photograph on her refrigerator. It is the same photograph that is in Claire's fireproof box. Claire, at 17, mid-throw, on the expression focused and certain. Donna has had it on her refrigerator for 20 years. She did not take it down during the years of the marriage, and she does not intend to take it down now. It is a reminder, she told me, of what her daughter has always been. Not of what she does, of who she is. So what is this story really about? It is not about a woman who fought back. Women fight back every day in ways that the world does not celebrate and history does not record. It is not about a cheating husband getting what he deserved, though there is a clean satisfaction in the image of a man who underestimated his wife discovering the full dimensions of that error on his own kitchen floor. It is not about martial arts, although the discipline and philosophy of Judo runs through every part of Claire's story in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like the perfect expression of a life consistently lived. This story is about the decision to convert pain into patience, to convert rage into documentation, to look at a situation that is actively destroying you and choose, deliberately, repeatedly, over 14 months, not to be destroyed by it. To hold the moment. To trust the plan. To feel your child move inside you in the worst moment of your life and let that be the thing that brings you back to yourself. I have spent a long time with this story. I have read more than I can cite, spoken to more people than I can name, sat with the parts that resist easy interpretation, and tried to resist the impulse to resolve them into something neater than they are. And what I keep coming back to, what I cannot let go of, is this. The most powerful thing Claire Merritt did in that kitchen was not the throw. It was the breath she took after it, the choice to stop, the decision, made in the fraction of a second between one action and the next, to be the person her father had spent 27 years teaching her to be. Not a fighter, a practitioner of control, a woman who understood, at the deepest possible level, the difference between having power and using it well. That is harder than anything she ever did on a mat. And it is the reason this story has stayed with me long after the research was done, and the outline was written, and every other aspect of the work was finished. Because I think most of us know what it is to be tested. To be in a moment that calls on the best version of ourselves, and to be genuinely uncertain whether that version will show up. Claire Merritt was tested in the most visceral and personal way imaginable. And she showed up. Not perfectly, not without cost, not in a way that resolved everything cleanly or left no wounds. She showed up the way real people show up when it genuinely matters. Imperfectly, completely, and with everything she had. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to think about it before you answer. Not the easy answer, the real one. Claire Merritt had every ability and every justification to do more than she did on that kitchen floor. The law would likely have supported her. The jury of public opinion certainly would have. And she chose restraint. She chose precision over vengeance. Minimum necessary force over the full expression of her capability. That choice cost her something. It requires something to hold back like that, to feel that justified and choose differently. What does it say about a person, about the real texture of their character, the kind that doesn't show up until the pressure is on, that they are capable of that. Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And I genuinely want to know what you think. One more question before you go, and this one might generate some debate. The letter. Daniel's letter to his daughter is sitting in a fireproof box in Claire's bedside table. If you were Claire, would you give it to her? When she's old enough? Or would you protect her from it? There is no clean answer, but I want to hear yours. Tell me in the comments, yes or no, and tell me why. The why is always the interesting part. If this story reached you the way it reached me, if it stayed in the room after it was over, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone going through something hard. Someone who has been told, directly or indirectly, that their stillness is weakness, that their patience is passivity, that the quiet way they are surviving something is somehow not enough. Show them this story. Let them decide for themselves. New stories on this channel every week. Real ones. Stories about real people navigating the parts of life that don't fit on a highlight reel. Subscribe so you're here when they arrive. And thank you genuinely for spending 90 minutes with Claire Merritt's story. I hope it gave you something worth keeping.